Embleton Grange, Cumberland, 24th of November 1947. Dear Mr. Murchison, forgive me for this rather belated reply to your letter. You will, I am sure, understand why I found it hard to entertain your inquiry with any pleasure. You evoked painful memories which I have tried for 10 years to forget. You mentioned that you are working on a monograph on phobic disorders, by which I take it you mean abnormal fears. I don't think we will ever learn the truth of what happened at Gruhuken. However, I know enough to be convinced that something terrible took place. And whatever it was real. It was not the result of some phobic disorder. I don't know how you came by the knowledge that Jack Miller kept a journal on the expedition, but you are right, he did, although he never showed us its contents. No doubt the journal would explain much of what happened. But it has not survived, and I cannot ask Jack himself. I wish you well with your work. However, I must ask you not to apply to me again. Yours sincerely, Algernon Carlyle.
Jack Miller's Journal, 7th of January 1937. It's all over, I'm not going. I can't spend a year in the Arctic with that lot. The way they watched me when I entered that pub. It was off the Strand, so not my usual haunt, and full of well-to-do professional types. Smell of whiskey and a fug of expensive cigar smoke. Even the barmaid was a cut above. The four of them sat at the corner table, watching me shoulder my way through. They wore Oxford bags and tweed jackets with that elegantly worn look which you only acquire at country house weekends. Me, in my scuffed shoes and my 6-guinea Burton suit. We said our hellos, and they relaxed a bit when they heard I don't actually drop my H's. But I was so busy wondering if I could afford the drinks that it took me a while to work out who was who. Algy Carlyle is fat and freckled, with pale eyelashes and sandy red hair. He's a follower rather than a leader. Hugo Charteris Black is thin and dark, with the face of an inquisitor looking forward to putting a match to another heretic. Teddy Wintringham has bulging eyes that I think he thinks are penetrating. And Gus Balfour is a handsome blonde hero straight out of the boys' own paper. All in their mid-20s, but keen to appear older. Carlyle and Charteris Black with moustaches, Balfour and Wintringham with pipes clamped between their teeth. I knew I hadn't a chance. So I thought to hell with it. Give it to them straight. Open scholarship to UCL. The slump putting paid to my dreams of being a physicist, followed by 7 years as an export clerk at Marshall Gifford. They took it in silence, but I could see them thinking, how frightfully middle class. And University College, not exactly Oxbridge, is it? Gus Balfour asked about Marshall Gifford, and I said, they make high-quality stationery they export all over the world. I felt myself reddening. Then Algy Carlyle asked if I shoot. Yes, I said crisply. Well, I can shoot, but not the kind of shooting this lot are used to. No doubt Carlyle was thinking the same thing, because he asked rather doubtfully if I'd got my own gun. Service pattern rifle, I said. Nothing special, but it does okay. That elicited a collective wince, as if they'd never heard slang before. Teddy Wintringham mentioned wirelessing and asked if I knew my stuff. I said I should think so after 6 years of night technical school. Then Gus Balfour, the Honourable Augustus Balfour, sensed that things were veering off track and started telling me about the expedition. There are 2 aims, he began, looking very earnest and more like a schoolboy hero than ever. 1. To study high Arctic biology, geology and ice dynamics. To that end, we'll be establishing a base camp on the coast, and another on the ice cap itself, which is why we'll be needing a team of dogs. Secondly, and more importantly, a meteorological survey, transmitting observations 3 times a day for a year to the government forecasting system. That's why we're getting help from the Admiralty and the War Office. They seem to think our data will be of use if there's another war. I said, and you're planning to achieve all that with only 5 men? This drew sharp glances from the others, but Gus Balfour took it in good part. I know it's a tall order, but you see, we have thought about this. The plan is Algie will be chief huntsman, dog driver and geologist. Ted is the photographer and medico. Hugo's the glaciologist for the ice cap side of things. We'll all lend a hand with the meteorology. I'll be the biologist and, expedition leader. And you'll be... He broke off with a rueful laugh. Sorry, we hope you'll be our communications man. He seemed genuinely keen to win me over, and I couldn't help feeling flattered. Then Hugo Charteris Black spoilt it by demanding to know why I wanted to come. And was I quite sure I understood what I'd be letting myself in for? You do realise what winter will be like, he said. 4 months of darkness, think you can take it? I gritted my teeth and told him that was why I wanted to go, for the challenge. Oh, they like that. I was glad I hadn't told them the real reason. They'd have been mortified if I'd said I was desperate. After that, things went okay for a while. Then Gus Balfour glanced at the others and nodded, and said to me, "Well now, Miller, would you care to join our expedition?" I'm afraid I got a bit choked. Yes, I said. Yes, I should think I would. The others looked merely relieved, but Gus Balfour seemed genuinely delighted. After that, we fixed our next meeting, and then I said my goodbyes and headed for the door. But at the last moment, I glanced over my shoulder and caught Teddy Wintringham's grimace and Algie Carlyle's fatalistic shrug. Not exactly a sahib, but I suppose he'll have to do. Later. Jack, what the hell are you doing? What the hell are you doing? I couldn't be part of their expedition. If I can't put up with them for a couple of hours, how could I stand a whole year? I'd end up killing someone. As I headed home, the fog on the embankment was terrible. There was a crowd on the pavement, so I stopped. They were watching a body being pulled from the river. Someone said it must be another poor devil who couldn't find work. You'd have thought that brush with mortality would have put things into perspective. But it didn't. I was still seething when I reached the tube station. In fact, I was so angry that I overshot my stop and had to get out at Morden and backtrack to Tooting. The fog was thicker in Tooting. It always is. I felt like the last one left alive. The stairs to the 3rd floor smelt of boiled cabbage and Jay's fluid. It was so cold I could see my breath. My room wasn't any better, but I had my anger to keep me warm. I grabbed my journal and spewed it all out. To hell with them. I'm not going. That was a while ago. I'm 28 years old and I hate my life. I never have the time or the energy to work out how to change it. Tacked above the mantelpiece is a picture called A Polar Scene from the Illustrated London News. A vast, snowy land and a black sea dotted with icebergs. A tent, a sledge, and some husky dogs. 2 men in Shackleton gear standing over the carcass of a polar bear. That picture is 9 years old. I cut it out in my 2nd year at UCL, when I still had dreams. That's when it hit me. Just now, staring at A Polar Scene. I thought of the body in the river and I said to myself, Jack, you idiot. This is the only chance you'll ever get. If you turn it down, what's the point of going on? Another year at Marshall Gifford and they'll be fishing you out of the Thames. That's when it hit me. It's 6 months till we sail for Norway. I spent the whole night planning, working out how soon I can hand in my notice and still survive till July. I am going to the Arctic. July 24th, the Grand Hotel, Tromsø, North Norway. I didn't want to write anything more until we reached Norway, for fear of tempting fate. I was convinced that something would happen to scupper the expedition. It nearly did. 2 days before we were due to set off, Teddy Wintringham's father died. He had to scratch. The others actually talked about cancelling. Would it be responsible to go without a medico? I had a job keeping my temper. To hell with responsible. We're young, fit men. Besides, if anyone gets sick, there's a doctor at Longyearbyen. And that's only, 2 days away from camp? Turns out that Hugo and Gus agreed with me. Because when we took a vote, only Tub of Lard Algae voted against. And since he's the last person to stick his neck out, he backed down as soon as he realised he was outnumbered. Afterwards, I went back to my room and threw up. Then I got out my map of Spitsbergen. The map calls it Svalbard because that's its new name, but everyone uses the old one, which is also the name of the biggest island. That's where we're going. I've marked our base camp in red. There, in the far northeast corner, on the tip of that promontory, Grhuken. There's nothing there, just a name on the map. I love that. And I love the fact that none of the 3 previous expeditions ever camped there. I want it to be ours. And now, here we are at Tromsø. Tromsø, where Amundsen took off in his flying boat 9 years ago and was never seen again. Tromsø, 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle. My first encounter with the midnight sun. Only there isn't any. The gentle, penetrating mizzle hasn't let up in days, but I don't care. I love everything about this place because it isn't London. Because I'm free. There's no dawn and no dusk. Time has no meaning. We've left the real world and entered a land of dreams. Months ago, Gus engaged the British vice-consul here as our agent. He's chartered a ship to take us to Grhuken. He's bought coal, boats and building materials for our cabin, and had them dropped on the coast to be picked up later. He's bought a sledge and a team of dogs and got us permission from the Norwegian government to overwinter. He's even engaged room for us at the Grand Hotel, which is actually quite grand. He's also been urging us to have a word with our skipper, Mr. Eriksson, who's got some sort of problem with Grhuken. 26th of July. The amounts of money we're spending, it's frightening. In Newcastle, we bought what we wouldn't be able to get in Norway. Egg powder, fries eating chocolate, and since Norway is dry, spirits, tobacco and cigarettes. In Tromsø, mountains of jam, tea, coffee, flour, yeast, sugar and cocoa, tinned fruits, dried vegetables, butter, and crates of something called pemmican, which is a kind of preserved meat, one grade for us, another for the dogs. But it was buying the rest of our equipment that really brought home to me what we'll be taking on. Tents, sleeping bags, ammunition, reindeer hides, as ground sheets, apparently. Above all, a formidable pile of paraffin lamps, headlamps, and electric torches. It's hard to believe now in this endless daylight, but there'll come a time when it's always dark. Thinking of that gives me a queer flutter in my stomach. In a way, I can't wait. I want to see if I can take it. In the morning, we're joining our ship, the Isbjorn, and its skipper, Mr. Eriksson. He's a hardened sealer and trapper who's overwintered on Spitsbergen a dozen times. I've never met a trapper, but I've read about them, and I know my Jack London. They're the real thing, battling the elements, shooting seals and polar bears. In Norway, people look up to them as true hunters, all of which I found a bit daunting. The books say the golden days of trapping were when Spitsbergen was a no-man's land. I still can't get over that. The idea that until a few years ago, a wilderness not far from Europe belonged to no one. That a man could literally stake his claim wherever he liked, without seeking permission from a living soul. Sounds wonderful. But it came to an end in 1925 when the islands became part of Norway. The stories they tell of that time. Marauding bears, lethal accidents on the ice, men going mad from the dark and the loneliness, murdering each other, shooting themselves. There's even a name for it. They call it Ra. And they talk of something called Isthava Kolla, which seems to be an extreme form of Ra. It means the Arctic calls. That's when a trapper walks off a cliff for no reason. One time, not long ago, they found 4 men on Barents Island starved to death in their cabin, despite having piles of ammunition and guns in perfect working order. The man who wrote the book says they'd been too frightened to leave the cabin, for terror of the deadness beyond. It makes a good story, but how could he possibly know? 27th of July, the Isbjorn, somewhere in the Norwegian Sea. I'm writing this in my cabin. My cabin. Okay, it stinks of seal blubber and it's only slightly bigger than a coffin, but still. The Isbjorn's beautiful, a jaunty little sailing ship, just how I imagine the one in Moby Dick, only with a 50-horsepower diesel engine that belches greasy black smoke. Somehow, we got everything on board, and the crew didn't drop any of my wireless crates. They're safe in the hold, thank God, not on the deck with the dogs. Those bloody dogs. I know we need them for the camp on the ice cap, but I wish we didn't. According to Algae, Eskimo Huskies are the toughest and the best able to stand the cold, which is why we had them brought all the way from Greenland. 8 of the brutes, filthy and overexcited after 9 weeks cooped up in the holds of various ships. I don't like dogs, and they don't like me. Gus says this lot will win me over in the end, but I wouldn't bet on it. They look like a pack of wolves. Same day, later. We hadn't seen much of the skipper till he joined us for dinner, so to begin with, we were a little intimidated. He looks like a Viking, sharp grey eyes and a grizzled beard. He's got a handshake like a vice, and he calls me Professor. He calls us all Professor. I don't know if he's making fun of us or not. The subject of Grahuken only came up once, and it was Gus, as expedition leader, who introduced it. "So, Mr. Eriksson," he said towards the end of the meal, "we're delighted that your splendid ship is to be our home all the way to Grahuken." His tone was polite but firm. The Norwegian's smile faltered, but he didn't take up the challenge. Dropping his gaze, he rubbed his thumb across his lip. "She is a good ship, yeah. I hope you will like her." I exchanged glances with the others, and Gus gave a satisfied nod. But later, when the others were talking, I caught Mr. Eriksson watching them. His face was grave. Then his eyes shifted to me. I smiled. He didn't smile back. 29th of July, the Barents Sea. Now I know I'm really in the Arctic. All day we've been making our way through the ice. I love it. The purity, the danger. A man in the crow's nest calls directions and Mr. Eriksson steers the Isbjorn slowly through. At one point, he cut the engine and some of the crew lowered a boat and went fishing. Others let down a ladder and climbed onto a floe the size of a football pitch. While they were filling a barrel with meltwater, the dogs jumped down onto the floe and raced about. We quickly followed. I couldn't believe it. A few days ago, I was in London. Now, I'm standing on an ice floe in the Barents Sea. While the others were playing with the dogs, I wandered off to the edge. According to the ship's thermometer, it's only a couple of degrees below freezing, but it was colder on the ice. My breath rasped in my throat. I felt the skin on my face tighten, and for the first time in my life, I was aware of cold as a menace, a physical threat. The ice was solid beneath my boots, and yet I thought, a few inches below me there's water so cold that if I fell in, I'd be dead within minutes. And the only thing that's keeping me away from it is more water. Moving closer to the edge, I peered down. Something slid through the water and vanished under the ice. I thought of all the lives hunting in the dark beneath my feet. 31st of July, Spitsbergen. By morning we were clear of the ice, and Mr. Eriksson said we'd already passed the Sørkapp, the southernmost tip of Spitsbergen, but the fog wouldn't let us see. All day we huddled on deck, waiting for a glimpse. Sometime after midnight, our patience was finally rewarded. The fog thinned, and although the sky remained overcast, the midnight sun behind the clouds cast a subdued grey radiance on an alien wilderness. The Dutch whalers of the 16th century gave it the right name. Spitsbergen, the pointed mountains. I saw jagged peaks streaked with snow, looming over the mouth of a fjord where the black water was mirror smooth and dotted with icebergs. Further in, a vast tormented glacier spilled into the sea, and all so incredibly still. It was utterly unlike anything I'd ever seen. It made me feel irrelevant. He'd made humanity irrelevant. I wonder if Grühüken will be like this. But as we headed north up the coast, I realised that despite all my reading, I'd made the classic mistake of imagining the Arctic as an empty waste. I never expected so much life. Great flocks of gulls perching on icebergs, rising in flurries, diving after fish, an Arctic fox trotting over a green plain with a puffing, flapping in its jaws, reindeer raising antlered heads to watch us pass, walruses rocking on the waves, one surfaced right beneath me with an explosive spraying huff. The sleek heads of seals bobbed on the surface, observing us with the same curiosity with which we observed them. Algae shot one, but it sank before the men could retrieve it. He would have shot the reindeer too if they weren't protected by law. He seems to enjoy killing things. Just before dinner, Mr. Ericsson spotted something on an island and brought the ship in closer. I made out the blotchy, pinkish-brown carcass of a walrus, lying on its back. Something had gnawed a hole in its belly and eaten it from the inside. The polar bear rose from behind a boulder and stretched its long neck to catch our scent. Blood and blubber had stained its pelt a dirty brown. Its head and neck were almost black. I couldn't see its eyes, but I sensed them. Until that moment, I've never felt like prey. A shot rang out. The bear turned its head. Algae took aim again. Before he could shoot, the bear had ambled out of sight. Kill or be killed. That's what it comes down to. And yet somehow, I don't find that appalling. There's truth in it, a kind of stark beauty. I think that up here, I'll be able to breathe with both lungs, as Mr. Ericsson says, to see clearly for the first time in years, right through to the heart of things. First of August, Advent Fjord, near Longyearbyen. Disaster. Hugo tripped on a coil of rope and broke his leg. The first mate splintered the leg and we carried Hugo down to his cabin. Mr. Ericsson, his face inscrutable, turned the ship about and set course for Longyearbyen. Gus, Algie and I squeezed into his cabin and tried to convince him that he hadn't let us down and endangered the whole expedition. Hugo said, "Right, here's what we do. You'll drop me off at Longyearbyen, where I'll find a berth on the next boat home, and you chaps," he lifted his chin, "will carry on without me." Silence. No one wanted to admit that they'd been thinking the same thing. 2nd of August, near Cape Mitra, northwest Spitsbergen. First Hugo, now this. This morning, Algie and I were on deck when Gus called us down to the saloon. We knew at once that something was wrong. Ericsson sat in stony silence, his hands spread flat on the table. Gus's face was set, his blue eyes glassy with anger. Gentlemen," he greeted us in clipped tones. "It seems that Mr. Ericsson here refuses to take us to Grühüken." We stared at the skipper. He wouldn't meet our eyes. "He says," Gus went on, "that he'll take us as far as Raufjord, but no further." "But that's 40 miles short," cried Algie. "And he says," continued Gus, "that these were always his orders, that he's never heard any mention of Grühüken." The blatancy of the Norwegian's lie astonished me. We pointed out that Raufjord has no ice caps, and we'd hardly gone to the trouble of bringing a sledge and 8 dogs if we didn't need them. He said he knew nothing of that. His ship had been chartered for Raudfjord, and to Raudfjord she would go. Behind his granite demeanour I sensed unhappiness. He hated reneging on his charter, so why was he doing it? Before I could say anything, Gus placed both palms on the table and leaned towards the skipper. His usual genial manner was gone. In its place I saw the assurance which comes from generations of command. "Now look here, Eriksson," he said. "You will carry out the job for which you were hired. You will take us to Gruhuken, and there's an end to it." The Norwegian sat like a boulder, immovable. "Mr. Eriksson," I said, "do you remember I asked you why you chose to overwinter on Spitsbergen? And you said it's because there a man can breathe with both lungs. I took that to mean that you felt free to make your own decisions. Was I right?" He didn't reply, but I had his attention. "Don't you see? It's the same for us. We thought long and hard about where to site our camp, and we chose Gruhuken. We chose it. We made a decision." "You don't know what you are doing," he growled. "Then tell me," I urged. "Why don't you want to take us to Gruhuken? What's wrong with it?" His face darkened. He glared at me. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me. Then he leapt to his feet and struck the table with both fists. "Helvetes fond! As you wish. To Gruhuken we go." "3rd of August, off Gruhuken. We had a clear run up the coast and round the northwest cape, although the weather remained overcast and foggy. Gus and Algy leaned over the side, counting off landmarks on the map. I went to the wheelhouse to make one last attempt with the skipper. "Mr. Eriksson," I began with a poor attempt at geniality. "Professor," he replied without taking his eyes from the sea. "I don't wish to offend you," I said carefully, "but I'd count it as a favour if you'd tell me, man to man, why you don't want to take us to Gruhuken." Still watching the waves, the Norwegian adjusted course. "Gruhuken," he said. "It's bad luck. Things happen there, bad things." "But what? Bad weather off the ice cap? What?" He chewed his moustache. "There are worse things." The way he said that, as if he couldn't bear to think of it. Shouts from the deck. Gus and Algy were beaming and waving at me. "Look, Jack, look!" While I'd been talking to the skipper, the clouds had lifted. The fog had cleared. That first sight of it, like a blow to the heart, the desolation, the beauty. A fierce sun blazed in the sky of astonishing blue. Dazzling snow-capped mountains enclosed a wide bay dotted with icebergs. The water was as still as glass, mirroring the peaks. At the eastern end of the bay, tall cliffs, the colour of dried blood, were thronged with seabirds, their clamour muted by distance. At the western end, shining pavements of pewter rock sloped down to the sea, and a stream glinted, and a tiny ruined hut huddled among the boulders. The charcoal beach was littered with silver driftwood and the giant ribs of whales. Behind it, greenish-grey slopes rose towards the harsh white glitter of the ice cap. Despite the cries of gulls, there was a stillness about it, a great silence. And God, that light! For a moment I couldn't speak. I turned to Mr. Eriksson. He nodded and sucked in his breath like a gasp. "Ja, Gruhuken." 7th of August, Gruhuken. This morning we finished unloading the ship. Every night, Mr. Eriksson and the crew go back to the ship to sleep, but we're keen to take possession of Gruhuken. So, we've pitched our pyramid tent on the beach at the head of the bay. I was a bit put out to learn that there had been others here before us. Gus found the ruins of a small mine on the slopes behind camp. He brought back a plank with what looks like a claim, roughly painted in Swedish. To make the beach safe for the dogs, we had to clear a tangle of wire and gaffs and some large rusty knives, all of which we buried under stones. And there's that hut, crouched among the boulders in a blizzard of bones. Gus asked Mr. Eriksson about it. So, were there trappers here too, or was it the miners who left all the bones? The Norwegian hesitated. Trapper first, miners later. And after them, no one, I said. Mr. Eriksson did not reply. I'm glad to say the relations with him have improved, and he and his crew have worked like demons to help us set up camp. Almost, Gus remarked, as if they've a deadline to meet. And maybe they have. With every day that passes, the midnight sun dips nearer the horizon. In a week, on the 16th, it'll disappear for the first time, and we'll experience our first brief night. Mr. Eriksson calls it first dark. I've told the others what he said about Gruhuken being unlucky. Gus was briskly dismissive, and Algie said I shouldn't indulge a man's penchant for superstition. Secretly, though, I think they were relieved that it wasn't worse. This morning, after the last crate was brought ashore, the Isbjorn set off on the 40-mile trip to collect our boats, coal, and the materials for the cabin. It's good to be on our own, a sort of dress rehearsal. I never expected this, but I feel at home here. I love Gruhuken. I love the clarity and the desolation. I'm happy. 8th of August. After breakfast, we decided to take a proper look at the hut among the boulders. A grim little place. Squatting in its drifts of bones. The dogs didn't like it either. They nosed about edgily, then raced off along the beach to investigate our tent. The hut itself was about 6 feet square. In front of it stood a driftwood post planted in a cairn of stones. Algie said it was a bear post for luring bears to the trapper's gun. I've never liked confined spaces, and as I crawled in, my spirits sank. The smell was thick in my throat, rotten seaweed and something else, as if something had crawled in here to die. Suddenly I felt desolate. I crawled out quickly and inhaled great gulps of salty air. 11th of August. The ship got back as scheduled, and we spent 2 days unloading, finished today, and would have made a start on the cabin if it hadn't been for Eriksson. While he was away, we decided to build it where the old hut is, at the western end of the bay. It's conveniently near the stream, and the boulders give shelter from the winds off the ice cap, and it's far enough from the bird cliffs to ensure that my radio masts get decent reception. But as far as he's concerned, we need to be east, practically under the bloody cliffs. You're leaving the mining ruins alone. You should leave this too. The mining ruins aren't in the way, I said. That hut most definitely is. But if I'm honest, I want that hut gone because I simply can't bear the thought of it. Some places drag you down, and that's one of them. Next day. It's gone. Though we had the devil of a job tearing it down. For some reason, none of the crew wanted to touch it, so we had to pay them double, and Eriksson had to have a stern word with them in Norwegian. Nothing's left of it now except for the bear post, which Algie told them to leave, as he wants to use it as a flagpole. I pointed out that we haven't got a flag, and he tapped the side of his nose and said, "Not yet." God, he can be irritating. Why Gus should regard him as his best pal, I've no idea. 15th of August, the cabin at Gruhuken. The cabin is finished, and we've moved in. My radio masts stand a few feet to the west, and beyond them is the Stevenson screen for the meteorological measurements. We've fenced that in to keep out the dogs, and set a line of posts with ropes slung between them all the way to the porch. As Mr. Ericsson says, we'll need this in bad weather. The emergency storehouse is way off near the cliffs, and we've planted the dog stakes in front of the cabin so that we can keep an eye on them. Before we're even half unpacked, I ran a test on my wireless equipment. It works, thank God. My heart was in my mouth as I started the petrol engine for the big transmitter. When the valves began to glow, the sweat was pouring off me. Shakily, I tapped out our first message to England. It's childish, I know, but I did enjoy impressing the others. The small Gambrel transmitter also works perfectly, as does the Edison receiver, which I got going in time for the BBC national programme. George Gershwin is dead, and the Japanese have bombed Shanghai. It all seems very far away. 16th of August, midnight, first dark. The Ispion has finally gone and we're on our own. Around noon, we had lunch with Mr. Ericsson. Gus opened 2 bottles of claret and a box of cigars, and he became quite jolly, gave us advice on getting through the dark time. Walk every day. Keep a routine. Don't think too much. He added that if we ever got into difficulty, there's a friend of his, an experienced trapper called Nils Bjørvik, overwintering on Videfjord, 20 miles to the west. He made quite a point about that. After lunch, I went for a walk upstream past the mining ruins. As I climbed, I realised that I'd forgotten my gun. I thought of bears and started back. I'd come further than I'd intended, and below me, out in the bay, the Ispion was tiny. The sky was a strange, sickly yellow. The sun was sinking into the sea. In a few minutes, for the first time, it would disappear. In the bay, an oar flashed. A rowing boat was taking a party of men back to the ship. I would have to hurry or I'd miss saying goodbye to Ericsson. Twilight came on as I scrambled over the stones. I was still 500 yards above camp when I saw a man standing in front of the cabin, by the bear post. His back was turned, but I could tell it wasn't Algy or Gus. It must be one of the crew, taking a last look at the cabin he'd helped to build. The sun was in my eyes, but I made out that he wasn't dressed like a sealer. Instead of overalls, he wore a tattered sheepskin coat and a round cap and ragged boots. I called out to him, "Hello there! You better get down to the boat or you'll be left behind." He turned to face me, a dark figure against the glare. Fleetingly, I saw that his hands were at his sides and that one shoulder was higher than the other. There was something about the tilt of his head that I didn't like. Irrationally, I wished I hadn't drawn attention to myself by calling out to him. Feeling foolish, I continued down the slope. When I looked again, I was relieved to see that the man had gone. Sometime later, when I reached the shore, Mr. Ericsson was at the water's edge waiting with the last of his crew to say goodbye. There was no sign of Algy or Gus, and the men seemed nervous, glancing over their shoulders at the vanishing sun. I didn't see anyone in a sheepskin coat, so I mentioned the straggler to Mr. Ericsson. He looked at me sharply, then back to his men. Taking my arm, he drew me aside. "You make a mistake," he said in a low voice. "There was no one at the cabin." Just then, Gus and Algy came running down bearing our parting gift of claret and cigars. Ericsson thanked them back. When it was my turn, he took my hand and crushed it in his bear's grip. "Good winter, Professor," he said, his grey eyes holding mine. At the time, I couldn't make out his expression, but now I wonder if it wasn't pity. Then he was in the boat and his men were pushing off. As it rocked over the waves, he glanced back. Not at us, but behind us to the cabin. The three of us stood and watched the boat reach the Ispion. By now, all that remained of the sun was a crimson slash on the horizon. Suddenly, Algy clapped his hand to his forehead, then turned and raced up the beach. When he reached the bear post, he hoisted the flag he'd almost forgotten, a dead fulmar which he'd shot that morning. Out in the bay, the Ispion dipped her ensign in reply. As the sun's dying glimmer turned the sea to bronze, we watched the ship disappear behind the headland. 28th of August. A couple of weeks' hard routine work has set me right. Up at 6:30, pulling on your clothes before the stove. The man on dog duty lets them out. The man on kitchen duty starts the coffee. Reading duty means trudging out to the Stevenson screen, which is like a beehive on legs, with a louvered screen to protect the self-registering instruments inside. At 7 o'clock, you read the charts, then check the anemometer, wind vane, snowfall and hoarfrost on a little brass sphere like an alchemist's globe. At 7:30, I'm on the bicycle generator, wiring the readings to the government station on Bear Island, from where they go to the forecasting system in England. Breakfast's at 8. At noon, there's a second set of readings and transmissions and another at 5. The dogs are fed at 6. In between, it's hunting and collecting driftwood. Algy's off on his geological survey, and I go in the boat with Gus and help him net plankton and little swimming snails. Last night, we had our first snowfall. Now Grohuken is clothed in white. The nights are growing longer with alarming speed, 20 minutes more each day. What do I mean, alarming? I like it. By now, I'm used to living cheek by jar with the others, and I enjoy the long evenings in the cabin. Gus working at his microscope, Algy cleaning guns and labelling fossils. We smoke and listen to the wireless, and I catch up on the latest wild theories in physics. Before I left London, my old professor sent me a stack of periodicals. As I read them, I feel a flicker of excitement. I remember how I used to feel, how I used to dream. Over the last few days, great flocks of birds have begun to gather in the bay. Gus says they're getting ready to leave. 30th of August. Gus was right. The dogs did get me in the end. Well, one of them did. Until this afternoon, I'd only progressed as far as learning their names. The leaders of the pack are Upik, the russet bitch, and her mate, Svarten. Early, Kiawak, Pakomi, and Jens are their progeny, and Isak and Arnedak are the youngsters, only a year old, although they look like fully grown wolves. Yesterday, Gus and Algy were off hunting and I was reading in the cabin when all hell broke loose outside. Thinking instantly of bears, I pulled on my gear, grabbed my rifle and burst out the door. Thank God, no bears. The dogs were baying and straining at their stakes to get at the youngster, Isak. Somehow, he'd found a tin of pemmican, gnawed his way through, and got his muzzle stuck inside. He was stumbling blindly about, clunking his helmeted head against rocks. When he heard me coming, he stopped. I didn't give myself time to think. I just ran over and clamped my knees about his middle, the way Gus and Algy do when they're putting on harnesses. Isak squirmed, but he couldn't get free, and I yanked the tin off his head. God, he was fast. Leapt up and gave me a headbutt that knocked me flat and sent the tin flying. He pounced on it and got his head stuck again. I struggled to my feet, then we went through it all again, only this time, when I got the tin off his head, I jumped out of the way. I was so pleased with myself that I emptied the pemmican in the snow for him and he downed it in one gulp, then stood lashing his tail, his ice blue eyes alight with anarchy. He'd torn one ear on the tin. After what he'd just put me through, I wasn't going to let him get lockjaw, so I unclipped him from his stake and dragged him towards the cabin for treatment. Halfway there, I realised I should have fetched the disinfectant first, leaving him tied up outside. Half lifting Isak, I hauled him through the front door, grabbed a bottle of disinfectant from the shelf in the hall, and hauled him out again. I sloshed on the disinfectant. He didn't even growl. I think he was too surprised. When it was over, I was so relieved that I gave him another tin of pemmican as a reward. Gus and Algie came back and I told them what had happened. Gus grinned. I said, "There's nothing to grin about. That's the stupidest dog I've ever seen. Imagine getting your head stuck in a tin twice." Gus burst out laughing. "Stupid? Jack, he's got 2 tins of pemmican out of you." Since then, Isak's been on the lookout for me. If I happen to glance his way, he lashes his tail and makes croaky rah-rah-rah noises. And this afternoon, he came and leaned against my leg. 15th of September. The birds are leaving and the nights are getting longer. In one of my periodicals, there's a paper by someone who's worked out that what we know of the universe is only a tiny percentage of what actually exists. He says what's left can't be seen or detected, but it's there. He calls it dark matter. Of course, no one believes him, but I find the idea unsettling. I don't like the feeling I sometimes get that other things might exist around us of which we know nothing. In a month, on the 16th of October, we'll see the sun for the last time. There'll still be some light for a few weeks after that, because at noon, the sun won't be all that far below the horizon. They call it the midday dawn. After that, nothing. I was reading and smoking at the table. Algie was playing patience, and Gus was outside checking on the dogs. Suddenly, he burst in. "Chaps! Outside! Quick!" As it was -10, quick meant a feverish dragging on of boots, jumpers, waterproofs, mufflers, mittens and hats. It was worth it. "The dog's fur was crackling with static," murmured Gus. "That's how I knew." We stood craning our necks at the northern lights. Photographs don't do them justice. It's the movement which impresses you most. The way those luminous, pale green waves roll and break and ripple across the sky, and vanish and appear again somewhere else, and all in eerie silence. A sea of light. Algie went inside. The 2 of us stayed, watching the sky. Gus said quietly, "Hard not to be moved, isn't it?" I grunted. With his heel, he hacked at the snow. I read somewhere that the Eskimos believed they're the torches of the dead, lighting the way for the living. He hesitated. They say that if you whistle, the souls of the dead will draw nearer. I threw him a sharp glance, but he was staring at his boots. "Do you believe in any of that, Jack?" His face was grave. "Believe in what?" I said guardedly. "Spirits brandishing torches?" No, of course not. I mean, unseen forces, that sort of thing." Embarrassed, he hacked again at the snow. I guessed what he meant by that sort of thing, but I didn't want to talk about it. Not in the dark. So I pretended I didn't understand. "I believe in the wind," I said. "That's an unseen force, and radio waves." For a moment he was silent. Then he snorted a laugh. "Very well then, be the literal-minded scientist." "I'm not," I replied. To prove it, I told him what I'd been reading in the professor's periodicals. 6th of October. We're down to a few hours daylight. Dawn comes, and deep down, you can't help believing that there's a full day ahead. It's a shock when you realise that the light's already on the turn, and soon it'll be night again. It's hard to get used to, that sense of the dark gaining ascendancy, waiting to take over. The birds have gone. The cliffs are silent. There's a sense of something waiting. 16th of October. I've seen it. Writing the words makes me break out in a cold sweat, but I have to set it down. I have to make sense of it. The sky cleared just before noon, so we got our last sight of the sun. It was Gus's turn to take the readings at the Stevenson screen, but I went with him to watch the sun rise and set, which by now is pretty much the same thing. Algie stayed inside. He said it would spook him to see it go. Twilight. Behind the bird cliffs, the red glow of dawn, but to the west, it was night. The cold glimmer of stars. The sea was dark purple, vivid and strange. Because of the cliffs, we couldn't see much. We saw the sky turn bloody and inflamed as the sun struggled to rise. We saw a sliver of fire, an abortive dawn. The sun sank back, defeated. Gone. So, that's that, Gus said quietly. Are you coming in? In a bit. I still had time before I was due to transmit the readings. The moon wasn't yet up, but there was still enough light to see by. No wind. Out of nowhere, for no reason, I was afraid. Not merely apprehensive, this was deep, visceral, pounding dread. My skin prickled, my heart thudded in my throat. My senses were stretched taut. My body knew before I did that I was not alone. 30 yards away on the rocks, something moved. I tried to cry out. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. It crouched at the edge of the rocks. It was streaming wet. It had just hauled itself from the sea, and yet the stillness was absolute. No sound of droplets pattering on snow, no creak of waterproofs as it rose. Slowly, awkwardly, it stood. It faced me. Dark, dark against the sea. I saw its arms hanging at its sides. I saw that one shoulder was higher than the other. I saw its wet, round head. I knew at once that it wasn't some trapper from a nearby camp, or a polar mirage, or that hoary excuse, a trick of the light. Behind me, the cabin door creaked open. Yellow light spilled onto the snow. "Jack!" Gus called. "It's nearly 12:30, the transmission." I tried to reply. I couldn't. The rocks were empty. It was gone. I stammered an answer to Gus. I said I was fine, told him I was coming in soon. He shut the door and the light blinked out. I've never felt such reluctance as I felt then, but I willed myself to take my electric torch from my pocket and walk down the beach and onto those rocks. The snow crust was brittle as glass beneath my boots. Pristine. No tracks, no marks of a man hauling himself out of the sea. I'd known that they wouldn't be. But I needed to see for myself. I stood with my hands at my sides, hearing the slap of waves and the clink of ice. The dread had drained away, leaving bewilderment. My thoughts whirled. It can't be. But I saw it. It can't be. But I did see it. And I know, although I can't say how I know, that what I saw on those rocks was the same figure I saw at the bear post 2 months ago at first dark. It's real. I saw it. It isn't alive. October 17th. All day I've been trying to get it straight in my mind. What did I see? Should I tell the others? It was Algie's turn to do the readings, thank God. I was on kitchen duty. I clung to it the way they say a drowning man clings to straws. I didn't set a foot outside the cabin, except to go to the outhouse. I'm writing this in my bunk. Tomorrow is my turn to do the readings. I'm dreading it. I'm going to take Isak. I can't face telling the others not yet. I wish I could believe that what I saw on the rocks was all in my mind, because then it wouldn't be real. But I know that's not true. I felt that dread. I saw what I saw. Grøhuken is haunted. That's why Eriksson didn't want to bring us here. That's why the crew always slept on the ship and was so anxious to leave before first dark. But what is it? It's an echo. That's what it is, an echo from the past. I've read about that. It's called place memory, a well-known idea. If something happens in a place, something intensely emotional or violent, it imprints itself on that place, maybe by altering the atmosphere, like radio waves, or by affecting matter, so that rocks, for example, become in some way charged with what occurred. Then, if a receptive person comes along, the place plays back the event, or snatches of it. You simply need to be there to pick it up, and who better to do that than a wireless operator? Yes, this has to be it. And it means, too, that what I saw on the rocks doesn't actually exist. It did once, but it doesn't now. What I saw was only an echo. 18th of October. But an echo of what? It has to be something that happened here, something bad. I know it was bad because of the dread. I flicked through my books on Spitsbergen, but I didn't find any mention of Grøhuken. And I've been over this journal and reread what I wrote about the men who were here before us. There isn't much, and I'm not sure how accurate it is because, at the time, I didn't think it was important. First, there were trappers, then miners, that's what Eriksson said. All those bones, and the mining ruins, and that tangle of wire on the beach, the claim signs, the hut. That hut. The desolation when I crawled inside. Did some trapper or miner do away with himself in there? Is that what this is about? Should I tell the others what I saw? 22nd of October. Too late. You lost your chance. They're gone. Gus didn't get up for breakfast. He lay in his bunk, feverish and pale. I was annoyed. I needed him to be better. I didn't believe he could be genuinely ill. Not even when the fever got worse and he lay with one knee drawn up, clutching his belly. I wired Longyearbyen and had a laborious question-and-answer session with the doctor in Morse. He said it sounded like appendicitis and he was on his way. The doctor arrived in the Isbjørn. It had been at the settlement when we wired for help. And after that, things happened fast. Strange to see other people when it's just been the three of us for nearly 2 months. But there was no time to take it in. The doctor said he didn't need to operate here, but Gus had to come back to Longyearbyen and have the appendix out there, and one of us must go with him in case anything happened. For one wild moment, I was desperate for it to be me. Leave this place, get the hell out of here. Gus needs you. Gus needs you. That's what changed my mind. He cares about the expedition as deeply as I do, and if I went, and Algie stayed, that would be the end. Algie would never have the discipline to go it alone, and Gus would know that I could have done it. I could have saved the expedition. But I funked it. All this flashed through my mind as I hauled Algie over to the wireless corner, leaving the doctor and Mr. Eriksson in the bunk room with Gus. "You go," I told him. He glanced at me and then away. What about you?" "I'll have to stay, won't I?" I snapped. He swallowed. "You could come too. The doctor says if all goes well, it'll only be a few weeks, then we can come back and carry on. What about the dogs? No time to take them with us, is there? And we can't just leave them. Eriksson would tell us to shoot the brutes and have done with it, but I couldn't do that, could you?" He didn't argue. I think he'd only objected as a sop to his conscience, and he never once offered to change places. They got Gus onto the stretcher and Algie crammed a few things in a rucksack. Then we made our way down to the shore. A squally night, sleet falling fast in the lamplight. As they manoeuvred the stretcher into the boat, Ericsson seized me by the arm and pulled me aside. He said I couldn't stay here alone, I had to go with them. We argued it out in the bitter snow. I won. But then he peered into my face and said, "This is a bad mistake. The one who walks. You've seen it, yeah?" Now, that shook me. Maybe deep down, I'd been hoping all along that it was only in my mind, and here was Georg Ericsson, hard-bitten skipper of the Isbjorn, finally putting paid to that idea. "Doesn't matter what I saw," I told him. "I can't leave the dogs and I can't scupper the expedition because of an echo." He didn't understand what I meant by that, but before I could explain, they were calling him. The boat was ready to leave, and I was running over to say goodbye to Gus. That's when it hit me. Gus is really ill. Gus could die. I felt as if I'd been kicked in the stomach. Gus could die. He lay bundled up on the stretcher. In the lamplight, his face looked carved in stone, disturbingly like an effigy. "Jack," he panted, "are you sure about this? You can still change your mind and come with us." "No, I can't," I said as gently as I could. "Don't worry, just get better." He licked his lips. "Good show." And it was a good show I put on as I stood in the shallows watching the lights of the Isbjorn heading west. Jack Miller, saviour of the expedition, heroically holding the fort till the others return. The lights blinked out. Quite suddenly I was alone, with the grey sea sucking at my boots, in this night that has no end. But I'm not alone here, not really. I've got the dogs, and the wireless, and there's that trapper in Videfjord, if I ever need help. I'm protesting too much, I know that. But the thing to remember, Jack, is that it's only an echo. It's like a footprint or a shadow. It can't hurt you. All it can do is frighten. 23rd of October. Well, I got through the first day. Routine, that's the ticket. Readings at 7, noon and 5 o'clock, transmissions half an hour after. I've had the dogs with me, and so far, no problems. The worst thing about being alone is that when I go out to the Stevenson screen or for my walk with the dogs, I can't leave the stove lit or a single lamp burning in the cabin in case of fire. It means I return to a cold, still, dark cabin. There's a sliver of moon, but soon there'll be none. I'm going to hang a storm lantern from the antlers over the porch. Last night I tried the gramophone, then the wireless, but the disembodied voices made me feel more isolated. So instead I sat and read, with the hiss of the lamps and the crackle of the stove, and the tick of Gus's travelling alarm clock. I miss Gus more than I've ever missed anyone, and I hate Algie for being with him when I'm not. Over the weeks, I've struck up an acquaintance with the operator at the meteorological station on Bear Island. His name is Olsen. He's got a wife and 2 little girls in Buda, and he misses them. But since the others left, I haven't wanted to chat. I don't like being on the bicycle generator with the headphones on and my back to the room. I don't know what's happening behind me. Although, of course, nothing is. 24th of October. Without daylight, terms such as morning, noon and night have no meaning, and yet I cling to them. I impose them like a grid on the formless dark. I know that evening is merely the stretch between the transmission at 5:30 and the reading at 7 in the morning. All quiet today. Nothing untoward to report. Again, I've gone through all our books on Spitsbergen in case I missed something about what happened here. One of them was published in 1913. It describes Spitsbergen as a miner's paradise. Rich coal seams easily dug. Deep anchorages, no taxes, no mining dues, no laws. Each summer, a small army of prospectors and miners arrive from Russia, America, Germany, Norway, Britain. Disputes are frequent, and with no adjudicating authority, are summarily settled. Settled? How? Is that what this is about? A fight? I couldn't find any mention of Gruhuken, but in another book there's a chapter on Spitsbergen folklore, which I've skipped. Damned if I'm going to let it put ideas in my head. I've got enough of those already. In among Gus's volumes on botany and birds, I found a memorandum book bound in blue American cloth. I didn't know he'd been keeping a private journal. Gave me such a jolt to see his handwriting. Sounds ridiculous, but I got all choked. I put the journal back where I found it. Unread, of course. 25th of October. Amazing news. A transmission from Longyearbyen. Gus op success stop. All fine stop. Have wired his people stop. Bear up, old chap. Back soon stop. Algae stop. When I received the transmission, I was so relieved that I could hardly take down the words. It was a clear day, with enough light at 11 to justify calling it that, so I took the dogs for a run on the beach. My God, what would I do without them? They're the liveliest, most affectionate creatures. I love the sound of their paws pattering over the snow as they hurtle off to investigate things, then hurtle back to tell me about it. To think that I wanted to leave them behind. Later. There's a thin film of ice on the bay. When I threw a stone, it shattered into long, jingling slivers. The tide will disperse it. But I've got to face facts. At some stage, the sea is going to freeze over. When? I remember Ericsson talking about the colliers at Longyearbyen and how they only stopped running sometime in November, but Gruhuken is further north than Longyearbyen. What if the sea freezes before Gus and Algae get back? What if I've got to stay here, alone, until spring?
You're listening to the Mysterious Magpie channel. Please subscribe.
October. 6:30 in the morning, and I'm letting the dogs out when it starts to snow. Softly, insidiously shutting out the world. No sea, no mountains, no sky. The dogs appear and disappear in the greyness like shadows. I bless Ericsson for making us put up those guide ropes. After the 5 o'clock reading, it was snowing hard. I'd just finished at the Stevenson screen and was plodding back towards the cabin. My headlamp off, me hunched into the wind with one hand on the guide rope, when I saw someone standing at the door. I was so startled that my snowshoes crossed and I fell, bashing my hip on a rock. And of course, it wasn't anyone. It was only the bare post. 29th of October. 3 days of rain. So no twilight, no moon, no stars. And this is ice rain, colder than anything I've ever experienced. Maybe I've lost my nerve a little after the incident at the Stevenson screen because I couldn't face my usual back and forth along the beach. Instead, I've been taking my walks by going outside and circling the cabin with one hand on the wall so as not to get lost. I keep my headlamp on at all times. Later. Message from Algae. Gus well, but Doc says can't come for at least 2 weeks stop. Sorry, stop. 2 weeks? I've been pacing the cabin trying to take it in. I've done a week on my own already. It feels like a month. 2 weeks. That's mid-November. Will the sea still be clear by then? Will they be able to get through? Whiskey. Lots of it. That's the ticket. 30th of October. I read that chapter on folklore. I wish I hadn't. It says that some places in Spitsbergen, it doesn't say which, are haunted by draugs. A draug is the unquiet spirit of a drowned man who lurks in the shallows, waiting to drag the unwary to their doom. And then there's this. Those who know the islands maintained at the beginning of the polar night is a time for particular care. Some say that 7 weeks before Yule, the graves of Spitsbergen open. 7 weeks from Christmas, that's October 31st. Halloween. But Jack, so what? The 31st of October is tomorrow. 31st of October. Did I make it happen? Was I more open to perceiving it because of what I just read, because of the date? When I went to take the 7 o'clock readings, it was warmer, only -9. I felt ashamed of my cowardice over the past few days, those dismal circuits around the cabin. So, in a spirit of defiance, I took the dogs for a walk on the slopes behind camp. To begin with, it was beautiful. The dogs raced about, yelping, chasing each other. Isak tugged on his rope. I'm training him to accompany me. But I was firm, and soon he was trotting along docilely, which was just as well, as I was wearing snowshoes and had a ski pole in either hand and a rifle over my shoulder. As the twilight strengthened, we followed the frozen stream uphill. It was hard going. Climbing in snowshoes means digging in with your toes so that the spikes underneath can get a grip and hauling yourself up with your ski poles till your elbows ache. One snowshoe came off and I knelt to rebuckle it. When I rose, the land had changed. I don't know how I lost the trail, but I did. In disbelief, I looked about me. Gone. I took the torch from my pocket and tried that. No good. Like the headlamp, the beam scarcely lit a yard in front. Downhill, I told myself. But around me I saw only grey, and with all contrast gone, it was impossible to make out the lie of the land. I swayed. I couldn't tell up from down. I headed off again. My snowshoes slid on an icy patch. At the same moment, Isak caught a scent and lunged forward. I fell. The rope slipped out of my hand. He was gone. "Isak!" I shouted. My voice sounded muffled. He didn't come back. Cursing, I groped for my ski poles and struggled to my feet. The fog pressed on me from all sides. "No, Jack, this is the wrong way. You're going uphill." I backtracked, but there were no recognizable features to backtrack to, and by now my trail was a mess of churned snow. No use following that. Lost. I willed myself to keep calm, think logically. How do you tell up from down? Answer: you kick the snow ahead. If you can see where it goes, there's a level ground in front. If not, there's a drop. Then I remembered the compass in my pocket. Idiot. All you've got to do is head northeast and you'll reach the sea. I dropped the bloody thing in the snow. I scrambled for it, whipped off my mittens, found it. The arrow didn't move. Not broken, surely not broken. I jiggled it. The arrow swung wildly. My hand was trembling. I couldn't hold the compass steady. I set it on a rock. The arrow swung round, wavered, and went still. There. That way. Gasping, I stumbled downhill to the beach. At last, I made out the bare post, and beyond it, the miraculous glimmer of the lantern over the porch. I shouted for the dogs. No response, but that was okay. They'd come back when they were hungry. Eagerly, I hurried on. As I approached the bare post, my headlamp lit the cairn of rocks at its base where a tuft of dead grass poked through the snow. The light touched the weathered grey wood of the post. Fog had darkened the blotchy stains to black. Without warning, my flesh began to crawl. I felt the hairs on my scalp prickle and rise. I couldn't see anything except the bare post and its cairn of stones. But my body braced itself. It knew. Then, through the fog on the other side of the post, came an odd, muffled scraping. A sound as of metal dragged over rock. Jerkily, I turned, the beam of my headlamp sweeping the fog. I saw nothing, and yet that sound was louder, more distinct. Clink, clink, coming closer, towards me. My heart hammered in my throat. I tried to run. My legs wouldn't move. It was in front of me now, the sound only a few feet away, and still I saw nothing. This can't be. But I hear it. Clink, clink. Silence. It had reached the post. It was so close that if I could have moved, I might have reached out my hand and touched. What? A presence. Unseen. Unbearably close. I stood helpless, not breathing, my arms clamped to my sides. Dread rising within me. A black tide drowning. Behind me, the patter of paws. With a moan, I broke free. Isak! Ran into the beam of my headlamp and stopped, ears pricked, tail tautly raised. His eyes gleamed silver, throwing back my light. I found my way to the porch, yanked open the door and slammed it behind me. Later, I went to the north window and put my hands to the glass and peered out. The dogs were back. All seemed oblivious of the bare post. It stood 3 yards from the window. I needed something to still the panic, something to make the sounds go away. Lurching to my feet, I blundered to the bookshelf, found Gus's journal, and opened it. The sight of his handwriting instantly gave me courage. It was round and schoolboyish, and he'd filled the pages with nature descriptions, interspersed with reflections on the Arctic and on the characters of Norwegian sealers. But I came across a passage which I found unsettling. 31st of August. This place isn't right. I felt it ever since the Isbjorn left. What? That time in the canoe when I watched the kelp moving in the water, I saw such things. Gus, what did you see? All that time, weeks of living together, and he knew? 16th of September. Why hasn't Jack felt anything? Last night, we saw our first aurora. I started to tell him I wanted to, but he got that severe look and changed the subject. It's odd that he should be the only one who has noticed nothing. The only one. 10th of October. Poor Algie. This morning I dragged him off for a walk, and he confessed everything. He said, "This place is giving me the pips. There are times when I feel sort of watched. And once on those rocks I had the most dreadful thought, or rather not a thought, but an image in my head. I saw knives. I don't want to say any more. And I smelt paraffin, I swear I did. I was desperate to get away, but I couldn't move. It was as if I were bound hand and foot. That image is still in my head. I can't seem to get rid of it." Now that winded me. Not fat, insensitive Algie. A scrawled entry for the 14th of October. This morning Algie told me he started to hear things. I badgered him for details, then wished I hadn't. I refused to write them down. they're too horrific. And what unsettles me most is that they closely resembled what I experienced in the canoe. I skimmed the remaining pages, but there was nothing more until just before Gus fell ill. "I've begun to realise," he wrote on the 18th, "that prolonged darkness can affect the mind in ways I'd never anticipated. There's a lifeless stillness about this land which affects one shockingly. Perhaps I'm developing, what did Jack call it? Ra. The extraordinary thing is that what I experienced in the canoe felt so intensely real, but of course it wasn't. No doubt that's in the nature of hallucinations that they seem so real." I sat, stunned, staring at his writing on the page. "Oh, Gus, whatever you experienced, you didn't imagine it. And there are worse things than hallucinations. What I heard at the Bear Post had objective reality. It was a lingering trace of some act of savagery which was once perpetrated here at Grahuken. An act of savagery. Why did I write that? Because of the dread I felt. I wouldn't have felt that dread if something appalling hadn't happened here. But what you must remember is that whatever it was, it's in the past. Whatever you experienced was only an echo. It was simply an echo." 31st of October. Later. I haven't been near the Bear Post since it happened. To reach the Stevenson screen, I took the back way, turning right out of the porch and looping round behind the cabin. I'm going to do that from now on. What I've got to remember is that others have overwintered here and they too must have experienced things, but they managed. Well, so shall I. I won't let this beat me. So I've decided on a few ground rules. First, I'll no longer kennel or tether the dogs, but will let them roam freely around camp. I'll wedge the door of the doghouse open so that they can come and go as they please, but still have shelter. I don't think they'll come to any harm. They were bred for the Arctic. Second, I'll draw up a ration plan. It'd be unthinkable if Gus and Algie returned to find that I'd squandered our supplies. Third, I'll cut down on the drinking. Okay, that one starts tomorrow. Fourth, no more than 9 hours sleep a night. In this endless dark, one can easily sleep 12 hours or more. But that must be resisted. I have to maintain a structure. 1st of November. A good day. I slept the regulation 9 hours without dreaming, and was woken by Gus's alarm clock. Things would be back to normal if it wasn't for a ridiculous habit I've developed of peering out of the north window to check on the Bear Post. It's ludicrous, I know. But I need to reassure myself that it isn't quite as close to the cabin as I'd thought. Outside it's -9 with a south wind hissing over the snow. The barometer is falling. I wonder if we're in for a storm. 2nd of November. I was finishing breakfast when it occurred to me that since waking up, I'd already checked the post at least a dozen times. That did it. I slammed down my mug. This has got to stop. Running to the bunk room, I grabbed an armful of blankets and hurried about, tacking them over the windows. It worked for about an hour. Then I drew back a corner and peered out. And of course the post was where it's always been. A little closer than I'm comfortable with, but no more and no less than it was before. Later. I've just come in from the 5 o'clock readings, and I don't know what to make of it. I trudged round the back of the cabin to the Stevenson screen. Isak came with me and came back with me too, and we followed the guide rope to the radio masts, then looped behind the cabin. We turned the corner past the outhouse and were heading for the porch when something brought me up short. Surely the Bear Post was slightly closer than before. I walked to the north window, then turned and paced from there to the Bear Post and back. 2.5 paces, only 2.5. Before, it was 3. Unless I'd unwittingly lengthened my stride, which is perfectly possible, but I couldn't bring myself to try again. 3rd of November. Today was awful. When I wasn't peering through the window, I was telling myself not to look, which meant that even when I was doing something else, it was constantly on my mind. It was so exhausting that after lunch I had to take a nap. I woke at 3, bleary and thick-headed. The first thing I did was to drag myself to the window for another check. I was about to peel back the curtain when I realised what I was doing. "Jack, if you keep on like this, you'll lose your mind." Dragging on my clothes, I grabbed a torch and an axe and flung myself out into the dark. The dogs surged around me, sensing that something was up. "I'm not having it," I panted. I kept saying it over and over like a protective charm, as I swung the axe and chopped the bloody thing down. I aimed low to avoid the dark stains higher up. Didn't want my axe touching them. The post was hard as granite. Didn't want to be chopped down. The dogs stood behind me in a huddle, silent for once. When at last the post groaned and crashed into the snow, they raced off with their tails between their legs. Panting, chest heaving, I hacked the wretched thing to chunks. I left them lying in the snow. I should have done this weeks ago. Later, the storm blew up an hour after I chopped down the post. Thick snow whirling, wind howling and rapping at the windows. My first thought was that I'd summoned it. I loosed the demon of the storm. It's nice to know that my powers of reasoning aren't much better than those of a savage. My next thought was the dogs. This storm could last a while. What do I do? I can't bring them inside. They'd wreck the place. I'd better feed them now, before it gets any worse. As for water, they'll have to make do with snow. At least there's plenty of that. It's nearly midnight and still the blizzard is battering the cabin. It's flinging snow at the windows like pebbles and moaning in the stovepipe. God, I hope the roof stays on. I hope the windows hold. But in a strange way, I welcome the storm. It's a known physical force I can understand, and it's better than the stillness. 8th of November. 6 days, and still blowing. As soon as I got up, I went to the north window and peered into the swirling grey. The bare post was back. Feverishly, I rubbed my breath off the glass. There it was, straight, tall. Not possible. You chopped it down, you hacked it to pieces with an axe. The storm must have thrown up another log from the shore. But then why does it stand so upright and still? And isn't it closer than before? And a little to the right, nearer the porch. A gust of extraordinary violence struck the window and I drew back. When I looked again, the post was gone. All I saw was snow twisting in columns in the screaming wind. There was no post. There never was a post. That was 5 hours ago. Since then, I flicked through this journal, which was a mistake. I'm shocked at how my handwriting's changed. I used to write a neat copperplate hand, but since I've been alone, it's degenerated into a spidery scrawl. Without reading a word, you can see the fear. When the storm blew up, I wrote that I welcomed it. Bollocks. The constant din. The screaming fury. It's wearing me down. Grinding away my defences. 9th of November. I woke to silence. Unbroken, unbelievable silence. Not a whisper of wind disturbing the peace. The blanket over the bunk room window had come down and I was lying in moonlight. I was so grateful I wanted to cry. At last, disentangling myself from my sleeping bag, I pulled on my clothes and padded to the window. There before me hung the full moon, Huge, shining, golden. Every detail of camp lay sparklingly revealed. Where the bear post had been, I saw only a gentle curve of snow. Like a recovering invalid, I shuffled about the cabin, tearing down blankets to let in the moon. I got the stove going. I didn't light any lamps. I didn't want anything to diminish that miraculous light. At the north window, I cupped my hands to a pane and peered out. The storm had cleared the ice from the bay. The moon cast a path of beaten silver over the sea, leading away from Grahuken. I watched it rise higher. I watched it gradually change from gold to silver, losing none of its brilliance. My breath misted the pane. I cleared it with my sleeve. When I looked again, a thin haze of cloud had dimmed the moon to inky blue. At that moment, I sensed I was not alone. With my nose pressed to the window, I felt horribly vulnerable, but I couldn't pull away. I had to look. Where the bear post had been, a figure was standing. Around it, snow glimmered faintly, but no light touched what faced me. It cast no shadow. It stood utterly still, watching me, one shoulder higher than the other. I felt its will coming at me in waves, intense, unwavering, malign. Such malevolence. No mercy, no humanity. It belonged to the dark beyond humanity. It was rage without end, a black tide drowning. And still, I pressed my hands against the pane. I couldn't pull away. A dreadful communion. I don't know how long I stood there. At last I had to breathe, and the pain misted over. When I cleared it, the figure was gone. But I had felt its will, its malevolence beating at me. I've been wrong. This is no echo. 9th of November. Later. I stood 3 feet from the window staring at my reflection in the pane. If only I could believe that what I'd seen had been myself. What is it? What does it want? Behind me, a cackle of static. The lights of the Eddystone flickered to life. I put on the headphones and grabbed my notepad. I had to keep watching the moon. If I didn't, clouds would hide it again, and then... Gus here. Stop. Against Doctor's orders, he'd made Algie take him to the wireless station. My hands shook as I tapped an inadequate reply. How are you? Sore, bored, cross. How are you? Fine. Stop. Really? My fingers paused on the key. Yes, really, I replied. Bad dreams, but better now. Stop. The answer came in a swift staccato rattle. Jack, Mr. E is here. He can fetch you in 2 days. Stop. No, I'm fine. Storm long, but fine now. Stop. Why did I say that? Why not yes, come quick, I can't bear it. It was so wonderful talking to Gus. Inconsequential chat, but everything to me. At last he said he had to go. I switched off the receiver and stared at my printed notes of his words. I was no longer the frightened obsessive who'd cowered in the storm and fought an illusory battle with a log. I was Jack Miller, the man who's keeping the 1937 Spitzbergen expedition alive against all the odds. Just now I went to the bunkroom window. The storm had kept the bay open. The dogs have dug their way out of the doghouse and are bounding about in the snow. When they saw me, they lashed their tails and yowled at me to come out. They wouldn't do that if there was anything there. Animals sense these things, don't they? But it will be back. I know this. I carry that knowledge inside me like a stone. What does it want? What terrible thing has happened here to make it haunt with such malevolence? What happened here? November 10th. Yesterday feels like millions of years ago. I remember nerving myself with a shot of whiskey and a cigarette to go outside, then opening the door to a wall of snow. I was relieved. Here was a physical task I could cope with. The dogs heard me digging and set up an impatient clamour. I hacked my way through and they fell on me. When at last I could look about me, I found Gruhuken transformed. The camp lay radiant and serene. Serene. I felt not a trace of dread, no taint of that malign presence. The moon had banished it. I worked for hours. Having finished my paths, I cleared the Stevenson screen and the other instruments and collected my first set of data since the storm. I transmitted them to Bear Island. I got the Austin going and sent a report to England. Then I went and stood in front of the porch and smoked a cigarette, like a settler in the old American West, surveying his homestead. I had regained possession of my camp. My camp, Jack Miller's. The dogs had been playing on the shore, but suddenly Upik skittered to a halt and pricked her ears. One by one, the others did the same. Svarten gave a low bark and hurtled west. The rest of the pack raced after him. As the patter of paws receded, I heard what they heard, a scraping sound, echoing in the stillness. But this was utterly different from the sound I'd heard at the bear post. This sound belonged to my world. The dogs came rushing back, their eyes bright with excitement. Behind them, I made out the figure of a man, his arms and legs moving in a slow, sure rhythm as he skied. Waving and shouting inanely, I ran to meet him. I was grinning like a madman, but I couldn't stop. "Trapper Björvik, I presume? Welcome." My visitor leaned on his ski poles in a haze of frosty breath. "Ja," he said, drawing off one mitten and taking my hand in a crushing grip. "Björvik." Later. He didn't say why he'd come or how long he meant to stay, and I didn't ask. Eriksson told me that in Spitsbergen you tend not to ask. You simply assume that your guest will stay at least a week and that his purpose is simply to visit. "I know I'm talking too much," I blurted out as we took off our things in the porch, "but I've been alone for nearly 3 weeks." I flushed. It occurred to me that Björvik must have been on his own for months. "Ja," he grunted, pulling off his boots. "It's good to visit." I sat him down, then bustled about lighting lamps, getting the stove going, making coffee. I found music on the wireless. I put together an enormous meal. To hell with my ration plan. This man had skied 20 miles to see me. We ate in bashful silence. At least I was abashed, as my conversational sallies had met with monosyllables. But Björvik told me later that he was simply absorbed in listening to Ivor Novello on the wireless. He doesn't own a radio, and it's been 2 years since he's heard music. I said, "You know, in England, I used to prefer being on my own. Now I think the best thing in life is having a visitor." Beneath his brows, his eyes glinted. Slapping his knee, he barked a laugh. "Ja, is good." 12th of November. 2 days have flown by. Yesterday, I had a transmission from Algie. He said, "All's fine, but it'll be a few days before they set off." I can cope with that now because I'm not alone. No one could have been a better, kinder, easier house guest. I haven't mentioned the haunting, and he hasn't spoken of it. Once, when I asked him if he's ever experienced Ra, he gave me a wary look and said he's never had any trouble on his stretch of the coast. Later, he asked about the bear post, and when I told him I'd cut it down, he frowned. That was my chance. I should have said something. Why didn't I? because I'm afraid that if I talk of it, I might somehow invoke it. I'd be inviting it in. 14th of November. Bjørvik leads a life of unimaginable solitude. His main cabin is on Videfjord, but he's built 4 smaller ones a few days' walk away, with scores of fox traps and self-shooting bear traps in between. He checks them every fortnight. He wouldn't have had time to visit me if it hadn't been for the storm. It brought the deep snow, and foxes avoid that as they fear becoming trapped in drifts and eaten by bears. I wish I knew why he always hunts alone, but he hasn't said, and I won't ask. Once, though, he let slip that when he was young, he wasn't God's best disciple. And from other things, I gather that there are aspects of his past which he regrets. 16th of November. Bjørvik is leaving tomorrow. He asked me to go with him. Touched me deeply that he offered to take the dogs as well, but I also found it alarming. What danger does he think I'm in that he'd risk his livelihood to help me? For one crazy moment I nearly said yes, but I can't do that to him, and I can't break faith with Gus. Which is why, when Bjørvik asked me to go with him, I said no. As I was trying to explain my reasons, it suddenly occurred to me that this was the 3rd time I've refused an offer to leave Grøhuken. It's as if I've been fated to be here on my own since the beginning. After I'd finished, Bjørvik simply said, "But your friends, how long till they come?" "Not long. They're setting out soon. They'll be here in 3 days at the most." He didn't reply. I sat down and met his eyes. I said, "Grøhuken is haunted." His gaze never left my face. "Yeah." "Tell me," I said. "Tell me what haunts this place." "There are things in the world we don't understand. It's best to leave it like this." "Please, I have to know." He was silent for a long time, staring into the stove's red heart. "Nobody knew his name," he said. "A trapper. Men call him bad names. He never seemed to hear." I stared at him. "You knew him?" "Nobody knew him. Once when I was young, I saw him in Longyearbyen 27 years ago." He grimaced. "When he was alive." What he told me then came out in fits and starts, with long silences in between. Nobody knew where the trapper had come from, the wilds of North Norway, somewhere poor. He worked his way to Spitsbergen on a whaling ship. He was ugly, and he had that abject manner which brings out the worst in people, particularly men. They gave him the filthiest, most degrading tasks. Bjørvik called him something in Norwegian. I think it means God forgotten, one of life's rejects. Somehow, he got work on a sealer and found his way to an isolated bay in the north. There he built a driftwood hut and took to fur trapping. For a few years he lived there on his own. Every summer he would turn up in Longyearbyen to sell his skins and pick up supplies. He couldn't read and he'd never handled money, so people cheated him. After a few days, he was gone again, back to the one place where no one set dogs on him and called him names. Grøhuken. A mining syndicate took it from him. In this whole vast wilderness they had to have this one lonely bay. They'd found coal there. They staked their claim and threw him out. Bjørvik chewed his moustache. "He came back. They say they sent him on his way. They say they never saw him again." "They say? You mean it wasn't like that?" His gaze slid into the fire. I don't know. After that, nobody saw him alive." "But you know something, don't you?" He shifted uncomfortably. "When miners have money, Mr. Yak, they drink. When they drink, They talk. In those days, I drink too. One night time in the bar in Longyear..." He broke off. "And they were there? The miners from Gruhuken?" "One only. By then the others were dead." "And this miner, he told you what happened?" "No." "But he talked and you overheard?" He glared at me. "He was drinking himself to death. He made no sense." "But you guessed. What did they do to him, the trapper of Gruhuken?" Suddenly he sprang to his feet, overturning his chair. "I don't know!" he bellowed. A shocked silence. Slowly, Bjørvik righted his chair and sat down and scowled at the floor. I got up and walked to the window, then returned to my seat. "I'm sorry. But even if you don't know, I think you guessed something. Tell me what you think happened." He rubbed a hand over his face. I think when he came back, they were angry. I think at first they want just to beat him, and then it turned into something else." He swallowed. "Men like that, when they know they won't be found out, they will do anything." Glancing down, I saw that my hands were clenched. I thought of the blotchy stains on the bear post. I felt sick. After that, there wasn't much to tell. The mine limped on for another year, but it was dogged by misfortune. A cable severed a man's leg and he bled to death. A boat overturned, drowning 2 men within sight of the shore. Finally, a rock slide destroyed the cabins and the surviving miners left. The following year, the prospecting company decided that the deposit wasn't rich enough after all, and abandoned the mine. Gruhuken stood deserted. It swiftly gained a bad reputation. People who camped here met with accidents, fire, drowning. A Swedish trapper shot his companion and then himself. The note on the body said he'd done it to escape the Yengonga, the one who walks again. There, Bjørvik's account ended. But I know the rest of the story. For over 2 decades, Gruhuken remained deserted. Then, in 1935, topographers from Oxford University surveyed this stretch of coast and mentioned this bay as a likely site for future expeditions. Gus Balfour read their report and put Gruhuken at the top of his list. Bjørvik sat with his hands on his knees, staring at the floor. I'd intended to tell him what I've experienced here, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. And he didn't want to know. I asked if he'd ever been to Gruhuken before now, and he said no. He's never hunted within 10 miles of the bay. I asked if he'd experienced anything untoward while he's been here. He said his dreams have been bad. Only his dreams. I envy him that. Again, I went to the window. I couldn't see the moon. I turned back to Bjørvik. What does it want? He spread his hands. I understood. It wants Gruhuken. And I'm in the way. November 17th. Bjørvik left nearly 3 hours ago. The last thing he said before he left was to be sure and keep the dogs close. At first, I didn't feel too bad about being on my own again. Then, an hour later, I spoke to Algie. It turns out that Gus has had some kind of setback. Algie swears he's not in danger, but it means they can't set out yet. Sorry, Jack. A week till we can leave. Sorry, stop. Numbly, I sent back an acknowledgement. That's okay, stop. Tell Gus, get better soon, stop. Okay. How is it okay? A week till their leave means maybe 9 days before they get here. That's nearly December. How can I hold out for another week? 18th of November. Yesterday, I was facing my first evening alone. I knew I wouldn't sleep, so I did what I've never done before and won't do again. I knocked myself out with morphine. I slept for 12 hours and woke 10 minutes before the 7 a.m. readings. I made it by a whisker. I was on the bicycle generator about to start transmitting when I remembered I hadn't let out the dogs, or rather, they reminded me with indignant complaints from the doghouse. I shouted to them to wait and set to work. At one point, I think I was aware that their howls became louder, then abruptly ceased. When I got outside, the doghouse door was open and they were gone. How did they get out? What happened to them? 19th of November. 2 days since Bjørvik left, 1 since the dogs disappeared. I miss the dogs. Without them, there's nothing between me and what haunts this place. 20th of November. Isak is back. I found him huddled against the door when I returned from the noon readings. He was in a terrible state, soaking wet and shaking with fright. I fell to my knees and flung my arms around him, and still that convulsive shivering. When I opened the door, he was through it in a flash, scrabbling to get into the hall. Then he shot under my bunk and refused to come out. All entreaties failed, but at last a chunk of butterscotch succeeded. I towelled him down and fed him a tin of pemmican, and gradually the shaking eased and he became more like himself. "Don't worry, Isak," I told him. "From now on, you're staying in here with me." He washed my face, his ears twitching as he listened. "But," I went on, "if I left you free to roam around in here, you'd eat everything in sight, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to tie you up." To stop him chewing the rope, I soaked it in paraffin. Then I tied one end to his harness and the other to the most immovable thing in the cabin, my bunk. Of course, it didn't work. When I was out of sight in the main room, he set up a heart-rending yowl, and it turns out he quite likes paraffin. He dispatched the rope in 5 minutes. So instead, I dog-proofed the cabin as best I could and set him free. Oh, it's wonderful having Isak with me. He's not house-trained. He's never been in a house. So I have to watch him constantly, and that's exactly what I need. Just now, he started to squat, so I grabbed him by the harness and dragged him outside. When he'd done what he needed, he trotted off a few paces and stood, facing seawards. Then he lifted his muzzle and howled. Felt the hairs rise on the nape of my neck. Didn't sound as if he was calling his pack. It sounded as if he knows they're never coming back. 21st of November. This morning, I nearly missed my talk with Gus because of Isak. I'd switched on the Ediston, but Isak was about to squat, so I'd taken him out. And when we got back inside, the lights were flickering. I rushed to put on the headphones. "Jack, where are you? Are you okay, Jack?" I told him about the dogs and Isak coming back. I explained that Bjørvik had left. "Jack, you are so brave. Expedition owes all to you." When he'd gone, I stared at his words on the page. I couldn't bear to put them in the stove, so I slipped them inside this journal. The silence after the noisy transmission was awful. Everywhere I turned, I saw Gus's possessions, and around the table, 5 chairs. 5. A convocation of ghosts. Later. Tomorrow I'll get back to my routine, but I'm beginning to worry about time. That is, about being able to keep track of it. My wristwatch still won't work, and today I've discovered that the Stevenson self-timer has broken. This means that all I've got left is Gus's alarm clock to tell me that the days are going by. There's no longer any twilight at midday, and the moon has dwindled to a lightless sliver. Tomorrow it will be gone. Tomorrow it's the dark of the moon. 22nd of November. Last night I learnt what Björvik couldn't tell me. I learnt what happened to the trapper of Gruhuken. I sat up late, writing and talking to Isak. Around 11, we settled down to sleep. I couldn't get warm. Eventually I went into the hall and unearthed our portable paraffin stove from beneath the dog harnesses and set it up in the bunk room. Much better. I dream I'm in a rowing boat with Gus. The swell rocks us gently. It's wonderfully peaceful. The boat tilts slightly backwards and I glance over my shoulder. A hand has risen from the sea to grasp the gunwale. I'm not frightened, merely determined. I won't let that thing haul itself out. I'm holding a large knife and with a grimace of distaste, I start sawing at the fingers. The dream shifts. Now I'm in the sea, deep down in blackness. Again, I'm not frightened, only disgusted. A drowned thing is clasping me in its arms. I feel its cheek pressed against mine, cold and soft as mouldering leather. Now I'm tied to the bear post. Now I'm afraid. I can't see. I can't speak. I have no tongue. I smell paraffin. I hear the crackle of flames. I know that someone nearby is holding a torch. Now I hear the clink of metal dragged over rocks. Dread squeezes my heart. It's coming closer. I can't get away. I am bound hand and foot. Clink, clink, closer. The terror is overwhelming. It's coming for me. I can't move. I can't move. With a cry, I woke up. I was cold. My sleeping bag was damp. Putting out a hand, I felt the wall wet. The stove had melted the hoarfrost. The dream was still with me. I knew that the terror I had felt had not been my own. I thought of the blotchy stains on the bear post, the sound of metal dragged over rocks. That's when I remembered what I'd forgotten before. The rusty relics which we found when we first came to Gruhuken. We buried them to make the place safe for the dogs. When men know they won't be found out, they will do anything. I don't want to think about what they did to the trapper of Gruhuken. I can still hear the clink of metal as they dragged the gaffs over the stones, as they threw down the knives and got to work. And after they finished with the knives, that's where the paraffin came in, and the torches. It's 2 a.m, but I dread going back to sleep, if the dream came again. So instead, I'm going to deal with this hoarfrost. Björvik told me a trick about that. You nail blankets to the walls and ceiling, and somehow that stops it collecting. There. I've done it. It's just occurred to me that what I've created is a padded cell. Later. I thought it wanted me gone. But now, I know better. I must have fallen asleep because I woke huddled in my bunk. Isak stood in the middle of the room. His hackles were up, his ears flat back. Outside near my head, a step on the boardwalk. A heavy, wet, irregular tread. The footsteps passed slowly down the boardwalk towards the front of the cabin. I groped in the bedclothes for my torch. Isak came and leaned shivering against my bunk. I found my torch but didn't switch it on. I watched something dark move past the bunkroom window. Clutching my torch like a talisman, I swung my legs over the side of the bunk. I stumbled into the main room. Isak followed. I dreaded to hear the steps halt at the porch, but they continued past as if it didn't exist. Feeling my way, I shuffled towards the north window. Nothing. I turned to the west window. There, half seen at the edge, something dark. The steps on the boardwalk ceased. They didn't come back. For Isaac's sake, I decided to create a semblance of normality. I got up and pulled on some clothes and made the cabin as bright and warm as I could. Isaac stayed close at my heels. That's how it happened. I was putting things on the shelves when I turned and he couldn't get out of the way and I fell over. I crashed against the table and sent the alarm clock flying. It broke. Something inside me broke too. Stupid dog, I shouted. I went on shouting, kicking and lashing out with my fists. He didn't try to get away. He cowered with his tail between his legs, not understanding what he'd done. And suddenly I realised what I was doing. I fell to my knees, flung my arms around him and started to cry. I cried till I was exhausted. By this time, Isaac had extricated himself and retreated to a safe distance. I think my crying scared him more than anything. That's when I knew I couldn't do this anymore. "All right," I said out loud. "Grahuken is yours. I'm getting out." At this time in the morning, Olsen on Bear Island would be asleep, but there might be someone awake at Longyearbyen Wireless Station. I'd forgotten about the hoarfrost. I'd done a good job of warming up the cabin. The Eddystone was beaded with moisture. So was the gambrel and the Austin and all my spare valves, wet, ruined, useless. When Bear Island receives no transmission for 2 days, they'll wire Longyearbyen to send help. Even if a ship can still get through, it'll take another 2 days, so that's 4 days at the earliest. 4 days. It'll be over by then. Later, I've just realised the significance of what I wrote about the doghouse. Something opened the doghouse door. It can open doors. It can get in. I'm not going to write this journal anymore. No point. I'm finished with it. So here we are. The final page, nothing left to write. Jack Miller's journal. The end. I've strapped my journal to my chest with a length of canvas webbing left over from the dog's harnesses. I'm sitting in my bunk in a mound of sleeping bags and reindeer hides. 5 lamps are burning in the main room and the stove is red hot. In here, I've got the paraffin stove and a lamp on a chair beside me and 2 torches against my thigh. It's warmer in the main room, but I prefer it in here, my padded cell. I'm not going outside again. I've got plenty of firewood, and when I run out, I'll chop up the chairs. Sometimes I talk to Isaac, and he sweeps the floor with his tail. Sometimes I talk inside my head, and then it's you I'm talking to, Gus. Once I wrote that I felt as if you were my brother, or my best friend, but now I think maybe it's deeper than that. And if I do see you again, I'll never find the courage to say anything to your face, so I'm going to be brave and say it now, fearlessly out loud. Gus, I love you. I wake to darkness and dead cold. In the instant of waking, I know that I'm perceiving what cannot be, and yet it is real. Through the doorway, I see it. It is standing in the main room, looking out of the north window. It's inside. Now it's turning towards me. I feel its rage. Its malevolence crushes me to my bunk. I fumble for my torch, can't find it. Can't get untangled from the sleeping bag. I knock over the chair beside me. Glass shatters, a stink of paraffin. I find the torch. The beam veers crazily off scattered shards. A slick of paraffin. Isaac is huddled against my bunk. His eyes bulge as they follow something that moves out of sight behind the doorway. Panting, I fight my way out of the sleeping bag. The torch slips from my fingers and hits the floor and blinks out. Whimpering, I fall to my knees and grope for it. I can't find it. I can't see my hand in front of my face. I feel for Isak. He's gone. Pain shoots through my palms, my knees. I'm crawling on broken glass. My fingers strike wood. Wall? Or bunk? Where am I? Footfalls. Heavy, wet, uneven. Behind or in front? Which way? Which way? I feel its rage beating at me, sucking the air from my lungs. Isak. He's whimpering. I race to my feet and blunder towards the sound. I crash against something hard, burn my hands on hot metal and fall. Still, that heavy, wet, irregular tread. Wheezing, I crawl across the floor. I sense space opening up around me. I see a faint red glimmer. It's the stove. I've gone the wrong way. I'm not in the bunk room. I'm in the main room. There's no way out. Cornered, I spin round. The stove door is open. I see the glow within. It casts no light, only deepens the blackness. I can't see. But I feel the rage. Close. It's coming for me. Staggering to my feet, I blunder past the stove and into the bunk room. Darker in here. Hand over hand, I feel my way past the bunks. In my stockinged feet, I slip. The portable stove goes down with a crash. I can't find the hall. I stumble against something clammy and cold, something that gives beneath my fingers like mouldy sheepskin. Dread clamps my chest. I can't move. My mind is going black. I can't bear it. The rage, the malevolence, I can't. Isak. He's scrabbling frantically at the door. I cannon towards the sound, my skin, my knuckles on wood. The door! Isak shoots past me. I'm in the hall, colder. Darkness presses on my eyeballs. I feel my way. Isak has found the door. I claw at it. I can't find the handle. I'm in the porch. I wrench open the door and burst out into the night. The cold is a wall. I run into it, my feet crunching in the snow. Cold rasps my throat, it bites my flesh. No moon, no stars. Isak streaks past me towards the shore. I run after him. Glancing over my shoulder, I see the cabin windows flickering yellow. They look wrong. That's not the steady glow of lamplight, it's the leap of flames. The cabin is on fire. I lurch against the boulder. I push myself off and run. I trip over Isak. He stands tense and still, his ears pricked, listening. Clutching his scruff, I hear nothing but the hiss of wind. Isak squirms out of my grip and shoots off. I can't feel my feet, but I stumble after him. My only thought is to get away. On the shore, the wind numbs my face. I hear the suck of water, the clink of ice. I've reached the sea. I've nowhere left to go. I've no coat, no hat, no boots. I won't last long. I'm past caring. Though I hate the thought of leaving Isak on his own. He stands alert, swiveling his ears to catch whatever it is he's hearing. His tail is high. It takes me a moment to understand. He's not afraid anymore. At last, I hear what he hears. A distant splash of oars. I blink in disbelief. Now I see it. A point of light rocking on the water. A rowing boat. Eriksson is at the oars, with Algie and 2 burly sealers. But it's Gus, I see. Moaning, I splash into the shallows, fall into his arms. Steady, old man, steady. His voice is gentle and he's stroking my back and talking all the time. There's a whoomp and a rush of wind, then a deafening boom. We watch blazing debris soar skywards, then crash to earth. The cabin has become a deep red, throbbing heart. Men are lifting me into the boat. I'm moaning for Isak. Someone throws him on top of me. And now the sailors are pushing off and Gus is wrapping my feet in Algie's muffler and flinging a blanket round my shoulders. Dimly I make out Algy's white, shocked face. I try to speak, but I can't. I can't even shiver. There's plenty of room in the boat for 6 men and 1 dog, but I huddle in the stern with Gus on one side, Isak on the other. Isak is pressed against me. His forelegs are splayed, his claws digging in. He's scared of the sea. Numbly I see the lights of the Eastbjorn further out in the bay. The boat rocks on the swell as we head for the ship. I lean against Gus and watch Gruhuken burn, a crimson so intense that it hurts to look. I can't drag my gaze away. I stare at the flame shooting into the sky. The fire sends flickering fingers of light towards us over the water. But we're too far out. It can't reach us now. I begin to shudder. Gus says that's a good sign. He's still talking to me softly, continuously. Beside me, Isak stiffens. I feel his hackles against my cheek. My heart stops. There are 7 men in the boat. Next to Gus, a wet, round head. Isak goes wild. I'm shouting, clutching him, trying to drag Gus away from that thing. Men are yelling, standing up, the boat's rocking wildly. Isak is desperate to get away. I can't hold him. He's overboard. Gus isn't there anymore. I'm screaming his name. I'm reaching for him. I can't get to him. He's too far out. I jump in after him. The cold is a hammer to my chest. The sea is dragging me down. In the darkness, my hand touches his. I grab it. My chest is bursting. I'm trying to haul him upwards, but my fingers are numb, and he slips out of my grip. Flailing, I strike a body. It isn't Gus. My hand clutches something soft as mouldy leather. I struggle. I kick myself free up to the surface, choking, spitting out seawater. I catch a choppy glimpse of the burning camp against the glare. A black figure stands watching on the shore. The boat didn't capsize, and those on board pulled the survivors from the sea and rushed us back to the ship. For 2 days I lay in my old bunk, drifting in and out of consciousness. Algy told me they'd been so concerned after our last wireless exchange that they'd persuaded Ericsson to set off at once. That's what saved me. The fact that I couldn't convince them that nothing was wrong. It killed Gus. He was the only one who died. His body was never found. Perhaps the current bore him out to sea. Perhaps he never escaped Gruhuken. I swore I would never write another journal, but yesterday I bought this exercise book. Maybe it's because tomorrow is the 10th anniversary of Gus's death, and I feel the need to give an account of myself, although I'm not sure to whom. After we returned to England, I confessed to Gus's parents. I told them it was because of me that he came back to Gruhuken, because of me that he died. I thought they'd hate me, but they were grateful. Algy had told them how I'd jumped overboard to save their son, and they could see that I was shattered because I'd failed. They found a specialist for my frostbite and another to help me adjust after the surgeon amputated my foot. They found this position for me too. I've been in Jamaica for 9 years. I work at the research station of the Botanical Gardens in Castleton. My duties are administrative and botanical. I can no longer tolerate physics. It appalls me. And plants bring me closer to Gus. I still have the journal I wrote at Gruhuken. It was found on me after they hauled me from the sea. I can see it lying on the top of my bookcase. It's warped and salt-stained, and I picture the words inside, bleeding together. I've never opened it, and never will. Isak is with me. The sealers hauled him out of the sea, and during those first days on the Isbjorn, he never left my side. He's adapted surprisingly well to the heat, by which I mean he's become lazy. Don't know what I would have done without him. He's my best friend, the only living creature I can really talk to, and a precious link with Gus. In his undemonstrative way, Algie has also become a good friend, although we never talk of Grahuken. My life here is a good one, I think. It's only in October and November that I have a bad time, when I wake to darkness and I'm back in the polar night, hearing a heavy, wet, irregular tread. This is for you, Gus. This is how things have been since I lost you. And maybe tomorrow, when I go down to the sea, I'll burn these pages and scatter the ashes on the waves, and they'll reach you, wherever you are.
Dark Matter by Michelle Paver was read by Lee Ingleby and abridged by Jeremy Osborne. The producer was Karen Rose. It's a Sweet Talk production for BBC Radio.